Hi, my name's David Austrin. I work at the Botanic Garden. I'm one part of the horticultural team that manages our collection of Mediterranean plants, which you can see around me here. These are our Mediterranean beds, as we call them, and a representative sort of collection of plants that come from all around the Mediterranean basin, and a landscape sort of evocative of many that you would see around the Med, sort of a mixture of what's called maquis and garrigue plant communities, a lot of low growing small evergreen trees and shrubs, and the word maquis actually comes from a Corsican word for a type of plant called a cistus, also known as a rock rose, and that's going to be one of the first plants I show you on the tour today. The garden's open to the public. Well, this is in the autumn, this is October, so you might see a few visitors wandering around, and hopefully you'll come down to the garden and see these plants for yourselves, and if you see me, do come say hello. I'd like to meet you in a socially distanced way, of course. So I thought we'd begin with the cistus, which is just here to my right. So this is Cistus creticus. The name tells you where it comes from, the island of Crete. Has these lovely pink flowers which flower for a day, and it comes from the Cistaceae family, which is a common family around the Mediterranean, and I'll be showing you a few more examples of cistus. And it's a typical example of something called malacophyly. It's involved these smallish sort of silvery grey leaves covered in fine hairs, which help limit transpiration and limit water loss from the leaves, which helps it cope with the long dry summers in the Mediterranean. And like many other plants I'll be showing you from around the Mediterranean, the upper side of the leaf is a different shade of colour to the underside, which tends to be lighter, greyer in colour, and it's covered in these small hairs as well, which help to maintain a little bit of humidity around the leaf, which also helps to limit transpiration. So these cistus have evolved a special way of coping with some of the difficult climatic conditions around the Mediterranean, and particularly with the prevalence of fire in the Mediterranean ecosystems. So once they've finished flowering, they produce copious amounts of seed, which, even though the parent plant gets destroyed by the fire, the seed will then germinate after the fires with the coming of the autumn rains, and new plants will grow from there. And it produces so much seed that it guarantees that it's able to reproduce. And after a fire, of course, the landscape's been cleared, so there's space for the new seeds and light for the new seeds to germinate. And whilst this particular plant's covered in flowers, we've got another not too far from here which is covered in seed pods, and I can show you that now. So as you can see, this Cistus creticus is covered in seed pods, and I can show you what some of those seeds look like just now. Let me get my secateurs and I'll cut one of those seed pods off and we'll have a look. If I tip that up carefully onto the palm of my hand, there we go, and there's some seed falling out. They've already opened, so I think some of the seed has already been distributed, but that's what they look like. And they produce lots of these small seeds that then lie dormant in the soil until another wildfire comes through, clears the decks, so to speak, and the heat from the fire is needed to crack the dormancy, the seed dormancy, because they're quite tough little seeds, but once they're heated up by a fire, they'll be able to germinate, and they'll come up soon after a fire has passed through, when the ground's clear for them to come up, and then a whole new plant will grow from that. Next to this Cistus creticus is another member of the Cistaceae, another species. This is Cistus albidus, the white-leaved rock rose, and you can see why it's got that common name. Very sort of grey leaves that help reflect the sunlight and help limit water loss from the leaves. on the hot Mediterranean summers. So this is the third cistus species I wanted to show you on today's tour. This is the gum cistus, Cistus ladanifer, and this has got quite different leaves to the other two species I've already shown you. It's got these sort of more darker green leaves that are a little bit sticky to the touch, where it has got paler undersides, as you can see there. So it's taken a slightly different approach to limiting water loss. The shinier green leaves help to reflect light, whilst the paler undersides also reflect light in a different way, but help to maintain a little bit more humidity around the underside of the leaf where the stomata are. And as you can see, we've got lots of seed pods on this cistus as well. Like the other cistus, it produces copious amounts of seeds. This particular species is used in the perfume industry. A chemical called labdanum is produced from it. And so it's had an economic use as well in the Mediterranean for many years. So we've just come around the western corner of the glasshouse range here at the Botanic Garden. The med beds are behind us over there, and the next three plants I wanted to show you are here, and you can find the olive tree just there, and in the corner behind me is the strawberry tree, and up above our alpine nursery we have the stone pine, and I'll talk a bit more about those three plants now. So this is the olive tree, Olea europaea, in the Oleaceae family. Your archetypal Mediterranean plant. I'm sure you've all eaten olives before. Found all over the Mediterranean basin, and its distribution is often used to demarcate what counts as Mediterranean flora, and also naturalized widely around the Mediterranean as well. And it exhibits something called sclerophyll, from the Greek skleros, meaning hard, and phylon, leaf. If you take a closer look at the leaves on a branch here, arranged opposite to each other, and they have quite a hard evergreen surface that helps to limit transpiration, water transpiration from the surface of the leaf. And then, like many sclerophyllous plants, if you have a look at the underside, it's a much lighter colour, almost silvery, which helps to reflect sunlight and once again limit some of the water loss from the plants. The stomata are found on the underside of the leaves, so that explains why you have the difference in colour between the leaf surface and the leaf underside. And this one is in fruit. You can see a nice olive developing there. Although that one doesn't look very ripe. I'm not going to eat that one now, because when they're not ripe, they're not very tasty. So this is the next plant I wanted to show you on the tour today. This is the strawberry tree, Arbutus unado, in the Ericaceae family, or heather family. And this really is the best time of year, the autumn, to see this tree, as it has this habit of flowering and fruiting simultaneously. If you can see the small white flowers, reminiscent of many others you see in the heather family, but also we have a lot of green fruits on the branches at the moment, and they will ripen to a lovely red strawberry colour, hence the tree's common name, and then get eaten quite quickly by the garden's resident blackbird population, which rather enjoy eating them. But I found one red fruit this morning. I had to climb high to reach it for you, but that's what they look like, and it looks very tasty, but I wouldn't try one. So the Latin name Arbutus unado allegedly comes from something the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder once said, from the Latin unos meaning one and edo to eat, i.e. you only eat one because you won't want to eat any more because they don't taste very nice, although it is rather attractive to look at. But I'll leave that for the blackbirds. So this, rather like the olive, has typical sclerophyllous leaves with a very hard shiny surface which helps protect the epidermis on the leaf surface and once again limit water transpiration, and a lighter underside to the leaf as well. And this tree has evolved a different way of coping with Mediterranean wildfires. So unlike the cistus, which produce copious amounts of seed, the strawberry tree and many other sclerophyllous plants like the olive and some others I want to show you have lignotubers at the base of the trunk, clusters of cells that will resprout after the rest of the plant has succumbed to a fire. So the plant can regrow from its rootstock and come back to life quite quickly, despite the rest of the tree having been lost. So that's the strawberry tree, and the next plant I want to show you is not too far from here. So here's the third tree just behind the glass houses at the Botanic Garden I wanted to show you. This is the stone pine, or umbrella pine, and if you look at the tree you can see why it's called the umbrella pine. It's got a very sort of typical dome shape, and a tree that you see all around the Mediterranean again, and a very important tree economically. This is where you get pine nuts from, and the pine nuts come from the cones, which look like this, quite heavy, quite a chunky pine cone, and that one's closed up and they open up in response to heat, and that's what an open one looks like. And the pine nuts that we like to eat and put into our pesto are tucked in there. There's none on this one. I think the squirrels have already had them, but that's where your pine nuts come from. So Pinus pinea in the Pinaceae family. Apologies for the noise behind. There's a girls' school just behind the Botanic Garden and it's lunchtime. And apologies for it not looking very Mediterranean. It's a rather overcast autumnal day here in Cambridge. You typically see these silhouetted against a nice blue sky, which I wish it was like that today. So there we go, the stone pine. And move on to show you something else now. So I'm crouched down here, we're back in the med beds, and I'm crouched beside an annual species called Galactites tomentosa, which is in the daisy family, or Asteraceae, arguably the largest family of flowering plants, typified by these flower heads called capitula, where you have lots and lots of individual flowers all clustered together in one flower head. And this is a species you often see growing on the roadside around the Mediterranean, growing on disturbed land. It's sort of known as a ruderal species from the Latin ruderus, meaning rubble. And it comes up, grows very rapidly after the spring rains around the Mediterranean, flowers with these big flowers that are quite attractive to pollinators, and then sets copious amounts of seed and then withers and dies back with the onset of the long dry summer. But as soon as the rains return, as they do in the autumn, as they've done here at Cambridge, you often get a second generation flowering in the autumn as well, and so we're getting to enjoy this for the second time here at the Botanic Garden. So this is another member of the daisy family, the Asteraceae, again, that you're likely to see around the Mediterranean. This is Glebionis coronaria, another annual species that flowers in the spring with the onset of the rains, sets a lot of seed, has these big open flowers again, which are very attractive to pollinating insects, sets copious amounts of seed, dies down, withers away with the onset of the long dry summers, and then germinates with the autumn and spring rains, and then repeats the life cycle again. So this yellow flower here belongs to a bulbous plant called Sternbergia lutea. The lutea referring to the yellow in the flower, and it's from the Amaryllidaceae family. And autumn and spring you see a lot of bulbous plants flowering around the Mediterranean. It's another adaptation that plants have come up with to deal with the long hot summers. They basically disappear underground and into their bulbs, their storage organs, where the flower has formed, and it comes up in the wetter with the autumn and spring rains. So we have Sternbergia lutea flowering now. We've also got autumn crocus, but in the spring we'll have spring flowering crocus and a number of other bulbs in sort of April, May time, and then they die back down with the heat in the summer months. So there are a lot of plant species from around the Mediterranean that have grey and silvery leaves which help reflect the sunlight, but on some of them, like this Salvia sclarea that I've got beside me here, they're covered in lots and lots of hairs which sort of fold flat above the leaf surface, forming a false ceiling which traps a layer of air adjacent to the leaf epidermis, when sort of maintaining a cooler temperature and maintaining an area of humidity around the leaf. And they kind of look quite furry and they feel quite furry to touch. Here we have another example of Salvia sclarea, the clary sage, with its seed heads still. You can see it's in the mint family, the Lamiaceae. It's got the classic square stem with four sides, and leaves and stem covered in lots of small hairs. So we've come around to the other end of the glasshouse range here at the Botanic Garden to show you two more plants, both trees, both in the same family, the Fagaceae family, and both oak trees. And the first one is this one behind me, which is the cork oak, Quercus suber. Majestic tree has been growing at the garden since 1909, and called the cork oak because this is the material from which the cork bottle stops in wine bottles is made. So in sort of Mediterranean regions, particularly in Portugal, the bark is stripped from these trees every 7 to 10 years to make the wine corks, without damaging the cambium in the process, and then that bark regrows quite happily to be harvested again at a later date. And the bark is what makes this so well adapted for Mediterranean sort of ecosystems, because it's very thick and it protects the trees from the wildfires that can come through. And when the wildfires have passed, the branches resprout again from the bark. It's another evergreen tree with sclerophyllous leaves. I'll show you the leaves over here. Once again, got a sort of a slightly shiny, hard, leathery upper surface with a pale underside, like we saw on the olive, like we saw on the arbutus earlier. So this is the cork oak. So this is the last plant I wanted to show you on this tour of Mediterranean plants at the Botanic Garden. This is the Kermes oak, Quercus coccifera, and you can find it with the Sainsbury laboratory here behind me on the way round to the Botanic Gardens cafe. And it's a very common plant around the Mediterranean, often, or rarely I should say, a small tree, often a very small shrub that can survive repeated grazing from cattle and sheep. Has these small spiny evergreen leaves, gets its common name, the Kermes oak, from a scale insect that lives on it called Kermes illicis, from which a red dye used to be made. I think nowadays it's made via different ways, but yeah, so that's Quercus coccifera, the Kermes oak in the Fagaceae family. Giving you a quick tour of some of the more common plants you'll find growing around the Mediterranean basin. Of course, the Mediterranean basin isn't the only climatic area in the world where plants adapted to cold, wet winters and long, hot summers grow. You'll also find Mediterranean plants growing in California and Chile and southernmost tip of South Africa and parts of Western and Southern Australia. But by far the most plants, 60% in total, that are adapted to those conditions can be found growing around the Mediterranean basin. So thanks for your time, and like I said, do come along and see them for yourselves.